Hey, welcome back to the channel in episode 3 of a read-along of Christopher Buehlman's Those Across the River. I'll be frank with you guys. Yeah, I'll be frank. There are some things in this book that happened within these 5 chapters, chapters 11 to 15, that I wasn't a huge fan of. I believe that the story has slightly gone down a very predictable road, but I will discuss it when we get to that chapter. Let us begin with chapter 11. What happened in chapter 11, you ask? Well, we finally get to Orville Frank Nichols writing. He's in the cellar. He's feeling uninspired, as many of us who write will know, possibly, that sometimes you just got to get out, and he needed a break. So where does he wander off to? Well, he goes to Miller's General Store, and he meets all these usual suspects here, having a discussion, playing checkers, as always, as we're very familiar with. And there is one notable thing that happens in this chapter, or at least in this scene, and it's right here when this was the tableau the large, bald black man froze when he walked past us on the porch and entered the general store, letting the screen door bang behind him so that its little bell rang. Paul Miller, being one of the men here, would later remember that flies came in with him. And this is the second time I've noticed this technique used. So we're obviously telling this story in past tense, first person. We're being dictated this story literally by our assuming to be our protagonist, Mr. Orville Frank Nichols. And because of this fact, I don't see this actually done that much. I feel like when most people are telling a story in third person or first person past tense, they just kind of tell it as if it's unfolding before your eyes, right? The reader's eyes. And we kind of forget that it's in past tense. It might as well be present tense. But here we see that Paul Miller would later remember that flies came in with him, meaning we're alluding to a future event that is yet to come. I wish I remembered the line in the previous one. I should have written it down because that would have made my point a little bit more clear. But I think that's interesting. It's an interesting technique to utilize. It's like giving the reader a little bit of a hint, right? Almost breaking the fourth wall to talk directly to them, to alert them of something that's going to happen, particularly with Mr. Paul Miller in this case. And our narrator notes here, aside from the Chicago moving man, I had not seen a colored in or near Whitbrow. So this is out of the ordinary. He's a big dude, strong looking, he said. And that was his first thought, this is what's kind of caught me off guard. I mean, I know he's talked about photographs of his mother and stuff in the past, but his second thought was what a good subject for photography he would make. The structure of his face was handsome and symmetrical, and his broad shoulders and thin waist suggested impressive athleticism. He would have to stand with new clothes, though. The ones he wore were none too clean. So he's a dirty guy. He's a big dude. He's inspiring thoughts of, or he's conjuring thoughts of photography to our narrator. But beyond all that, he's not acting like a lot of black guys, according to our narrator, or black people would react in this location, in this time period, when he says, he did not enter the store the way black men often entered with white establishments. He did not look down, nor did he state his business by way of asking permission to approach. So we already know this guy, he's not like other men in this time period. He also notes that there's a strange accent. What was that accent? Caribbean, West Indies? But he pays for his goods, and the very last thing that is interesting, which we do see pop up in a later chapter that we've covered this week, he does something strange. He stops and he holds the door open and sniffs the air on the porch. And then he looks at me, being Frank Nichols, not long enough to draw anyone's attention but mine. And so what happens next? Well, all of these gentlemen start to argue about this man. Like, what right did he have to come in here like that? The store owner is accused of just letting him kind of walk in and do what he wants, which is, not common during this time period in this location. But Mr. Gordeau says something that is strange, right? He says, damn right his money's good, Gordeau said. Lest I miss my guess, that's the same one used to bring coins and jewels in to Harry before he closed up. Old stuff, old watches and shit. God knows where from. I don't think he's been around since the year we got all them grasshoppers. And to me, that conjures up the idea of the biblical plague, the grasshoppers. And all of these men argue about knowing this man, or thinking they know his man. And then one-armed Mike, he says, he keeps roosters for a gang man out of Chicago, and they say he got him a white woman. Ooh. Lordy, lordy. And that more or less ends that scene, and we are finding our narrator intercepting his love, Eudora, as she crossed the town square. And this man shows up again, right here. At just that moment, I saw him come out of Estill Blake's hardware shop with a spool of wire around his shoulder and the big bag from the general store in his hand. He was chewing the last of his pickle. He crossed the square lawn diagonally, making right for us. He was staring at Dora. He stopped in front of us. His nostrils widened as he took in our scent. He kept staring at Dora. And this final line, unbidden, the N-word, rose up in his head and almost pushed its way into his mouth. So this is not the first time we've had our protagonist fighting his past, I think, his racist past. At least that's what I believe it's alluding to. Not his personal past, but his familial past. His grandfather owned a bunch of slaves, and he's sort of the strange bit of history around these parts, the one that he is writing this book about. And it makes me wonder if our protagonist is going to be drawn in by whatever magic, whatever evilness is afoot here because of his bloodline. Or maybe this is just him fighting himself. I'm not quite sure, but in any case, I can tell the author is placing some significance on it because, as I said, this has not been the first time. And we end this chapter with Frank Nichols, just back down at his typewriter, contemplating the time period again, trying to create this book of his. So kind of an underwhelming chapter. I mean, we have this interesting character pop up. He is sniffing the air, some might say like a wolf, noticing his wife, and it almost feels as if the plot is just kind of trucking along at this point. People are being put in their places. It has a bit of an unnatural feel to me, and I'll get more into that because there are some other chapters that do as well. But chapter 12, well, it was late August when I went to interview Bessie Wilcox, the Sunny Rest nursing home just outside Milltown. So he has an interesting exchange with this older woman. He's posing as her nephew, at least to get in there. Doing some research, let's say. And he brings Eudora along. And Miss Wilcox says that Eudora is going to break our protagonist's heart. Why? She says, well, yep, she will. She got them crazy two daddy eyes on her. I like that expression. So is that going to be foreshadowing? Is that just the banter of an old crazy woman? I don't know. We shall see. But she also illuminates some things about Mr. Savoyard. Everybody met him. He was a gentleman, like they don't make no more. He sat a good horse, all rich, in his blue and silver waistcoat, prettiest cloth I ever saw. I remember asking my mama, would the angels wear gowns made of that? It was silk. First time I ever saw silk. He let me touch it. And anyway, she recounts the slavery. He asks her a lot about like what she felt about that era. And I thought this was a particularly interesting line because I'm not trying to get political or anything, but in this day and age, sometimes we can't just talk about how things are or were, right? Sometimes it's always steeped in people getting offended, so on and so forth. But I think that's why this line is so great. So when he asks her about slavery, she responds, wasn't no way to feel about it. That's just how it was. That was slave days. Now, some of it was done right and some of it was done wrong. So she, wise in her age, is recounting to him that, as we all probably do, like how could anyone do that to anyone in any period of time? Because we're looking at it through sort of the lens of the modern day, of the present. And I'm sure we'll look back now and look back on ourselves and wonder the same thing about something we're doing now. And I know we're always progressing, always getting better, always trying to do the right thing. And it's interesting to look back on our history, on our past that really isn't that long ago and question like, how could we have possibly done that? But she says it so succinctly right here. He's like, that's just how it was, right? That's how it was. That's how people were. And it's a really interesting observation of humanity because sometimes ideas are like that. They're like a virus, right? They break through any kind of any walls of logic or morality and they just completely infect us. And so I think that's a cool way to describe it. That's just, that's how it was. It's as simple as that, right? We don't need to overanalyze it because it's pretty obvious how the human mind works or can be coerced quite easily into very, very bad things. And here we have another biblical reference. So he asks her more about Mr. Savoyard, and she sang more songs to the faded glory of the Savoyards, and what a shame it was the Yankees won. She told me that when the slaves killed him, the pastor told his congregation to weep like the Israelites wept for Zion. And that pretty much ends the conversation, the interview. But before Frank leaves, he meets another old man who says, don't you believe them horse feathers about Savoyard? I ran his dogs on runaways afore I seen enough to quit. Then I was 15, old enough to join the militia. But the things I'd done, I helped take the skin off one who ran away twice and stretched his hide between two poles like a jackrabbit, with his face still on it. Had a wheel to spin them on until they lost their minds. But he didn't run dogs on his slaves when he hunted. He went out by himself. I saw him once, coming back naked, and they never came back. That place is haunted, young man. And so we learn some more grisly, creepy details about Mr. Savoyard, but that pretty much ends this chapter. There's a strange punctuated moment here when he's admiring his wife, who's painting her nails. Her feet are on the dashboard. Her legs are very visible. And he threw his head back and laughed and thought, Jesus Christ, I'm in love. Not really sure what the point of that was. I didn't see anything that we haven't seen before. We clearly know that this guy is very smitten with his soon-to-be wife. But it does show his mental state. It shows the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, in this scene full of very, very evil deeds, at least in the past. This brings us to chapter 13. And it was on the first or second day of September that the vagrants came to town. 2 men, one white and one black, accompanying a mannish woman who smoked a pipe and wore her hair up under a man's hat, established themselves on the benches in the middle of the town square. This is one of those chapters that feels like it's bringing in more characters to set the stage for something to happen. Just like the man who was sniffing the air and sniffing Eudora, I guess, from afar. This chapter really doesn't do anything other than that, all right? These guys have some ice cream, and honestly, that's about it. There's nothing pivotal that happens throughout this entire thing, unless there's something I missed. There was no interesting piece of dialogue, nothing that made me question why they might be here. And that's about it. I mean, the pastor tries to argue to allow them to stay a little bit, but the sheriff is pushing back, and the pastor leaves them with a final blessing, and God bless you 3. May you find the next doors open to you. But if they heard, they made no sign. So a quick chapter, a chapter that seemed to do absolutely nothing except introduce these 3 vagrants. So we'll see what part they play. I can only assume they're going to play a part. However, I felt like that scene could have been injected into another chapter, maybe something that had a little bit more interest to it. Because one thing I've noticed is that overall, I think he's really good at constructing chapters. They don't feel out of place. They don't feel like they're just kind of fluff, except in this series of chapters, specifically that one that felt kind of out of place and a little bit sloppy, considering the rest of his writing is pretty damn good. And that brings us to chapter 14, and this is my disappointment here. So out of the blue, and perhaps I missed it, but we have Dora and I arrived early at the town hall on the night Whitbrow met to discuss the chase of the pigs, whether to continue it. So if you remember way back, the chase of the pigs were when they dressed these pigs up in fancy floral arrangements and sent them off into the forest to presumably be sacrificed. We were never really given any reason as to why they did this, just that it was some kind of tradition. It reminded our protagonist of some pagan ritual that he saw in the south of France. The first thing that threw me off about this is that, like I said, I don't remember them ever bringing up that this was going to happen, that there was going to be, there was an event coming up where the town was going to vote on this custom and whether to keep it or to ditch it. And if I missed it, it's completely my fault, but I'm just going under the assumption that I did not miss it. And this came out of left field because that is the feeling I got, that it didn't feel like there was much lead up to it. There was nobody saying, oh, hey, this council meeting's coming up where we're going to vote on that pig thing. You know, even on the scene when we were witnessing that, I don't remember a character criticizing this event and another guy saying, hey, don't you worry, we're going to have a chance to close this thing down in a few days' time. That would have at least made this feel like a more natural progression of the narrative. But hey, I could have missed something. If I did, let me know in the comments. But anyway, we know the entire town has come. And this place is so crowded that they couldn't fit everybody inside. They were just spreading outside of the town hall. Some are spreading blankets. Those that brought chairs sat in these and smoked and swatted at the mosquitoes that seemed intent on bleeding the whole town white. But what we get here is a handful of members of the town who get to come up and speak their piece as to if this tradition should continue or if it should completely go away. There's one thing here. Mr. Gordeau says, now I didn't like it when them government sons of bitches came and bought up all our piglets in 33 and killed them all. So I had to look that up, of course, and in fact it was an actual historical event. It was called the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and basically the government, the federal government, decided that, or thought that livestock prices were too cheap because the farmers were breeding too many pigs. And so they mandated the slaughter of many, many pigs. And here it says nationwide, 6 million hogs were purchased from desperate farmers. In the South, 1 million farmers were paid to plow under 10.4 million acres of cotton. So kind of cool how he's weaving history in here. He's done it obviously more than a few times. He's done his research. There's only one anachronism that has been called out so far, and that was with photography. So what I like about that is he created this kind of creepy custom with this small town that does appear to be pagan in nature, but he's also attributing some validity to it from a historical perspective when Gordeau says that line. So we have Mr. Gordeau who is for stopping it because he says, I don't think God wants us to go hungry, and I don't think God wants us to turn animals that don't know how to fend for themselves out to die when they's used to having their corn to give them in a trough. That's all. And Reverend, I'll start going to church more. I like there's a little bit of levity here. There's some jokes that are had. And Lester comes up, the man who led our protagonist into the forest the first time, and his Adam's apple bobbed, and he did not look up much as he spoke. He said, I think we should keep the chase because we always had it. It was ours as long as I can remember. And I don't think no other place had it even once. I mean, Morgan's always been a bigger town and they ain't got it. I know it costs and times are hard, but I'll just keep giving what I can if others will. I mean, the mill town ain't even got it. And his father fires back. He disagrees. Know what they got in that mill town that we ain't got? Pork chops. And again, more laughter. Which leads us to the disappointing part in this chapter, really. For me, anyway. Let me know what you thought about it, because I feel like it's just a strange way to use this character, Mr. Cranmer, Mr. Martin Cranmer. Because I love this guy. I think he's been hilarious. He's been interesting. But here he's described in a very different way. And you may argue because it's the information he's about to give. But I didn't read it that way. I didn't read that he had this... He was speaking this with such conviction, such passion, right, to justify that. And it says here that our narrator sees he's drunk. He seems to be drunk anyway, but he looks sober to everybody else, but he appears to be, at least to the narrator, drunk in the way the only career drinkers get. But this is what Martin said. I know a lot of you don't like me, and that's fine because I only like a few of you. I hunt things in the woods and I stuff them and I sell them. Some of you good Christians buy another product I sell in jars, the moonshine, just because I run it through twice for good measure. I charge the thump keg just right, and you know I don't cut it with embalming fluid like McLeish did before you ran him out of town. Some of you trade me the yeast or corn or sugar I need, but other than that, I don't need people. If you all disappeared tomorrow, I would be as happy as the man in the moon. He's establishing here that he doesn't care for the townspeople whatsoever, and I'm not sure where that's going to get him. Maybe he thinks it's going to make his point hit home a little bit. You know, if he's saying that he doesn't give a shit about anybody, but then he wants to protect everybody in the next statement, which he does, more or less. That's the only way I can explain it. Someone says, get to the point, and he says, my point, without putting too fine a point on it, is that marching those pigs out into the woods is the most intelligent things you people do. Every month I watch a couple of young men go by my house into the river with pigs. I watch the fellows take that little ferry off the rocks and load the animals on and pull them across the river and let them go. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear squealing. So my point is that something or someone or something who is someone is making a meal of those swine. And if you stop sending them, do you think it's possible that your pig eater or pig eaters might decide to come to town for supper? That is a very weird thing to say. To me, I see that as the crazy town drunk, which he kind of is, but he's not portrayed as a crazy drunk in this instance. He's almost talking down to these people. He states that he doesn't care for them, but he's concerned if they stop this tradition because he thinks that creatures are going to come out of the woods, meaning he knows about this. But I think the way this is more effective in horror films, at least the way I've seen it, is that it normally comes from an unreliable character, right? So someone who's crazy, someone who's drunk, the old man who lives in the woods, very similar to what Cranmer does, but he's typically not speaking down to people, right? He's usually the one who has no respect. The townspeople, let's say in this case, or the people who he is speaking to, are generally more intelligent, and he might be the crazy old man with crazy old beliefs. And so really this is very heavy-handed, right? It's almost him talking to the readers. It's stuff that we've been hypothesizing for some time, right? That there's something scary across the river. Most likely they're sending these pigs as sacrificial lambs, so to speak. But to have the characters say it this plainly, with this kind of demeanor, to me is a very disappointing development, right? It feels like, again, plot is moving along. I didn't really like this at all. And it's kind of unfortunate because I really liked this character. I liked where he was going. He had a great personality, had some really great lines, probably some of the best lines of this entire book, and this is where the author takes him. He takes him up to the podium on this seemingly impromptu town hall meeting to talk about the chase of the pigs. And he's more or less calm and cool and collected. I know he's got his white-knuckled hands on the podium, but he's not a ranting drunk, right? He's not someone we can finally disagree with, right? We can get on the side of these townspeople and say, look at this crazy ranting drunk, he's insane. Because up until this point, we've, I think, more or less respected this guy, right? He seems intelligent. He came all the way to town to talk to Frank Nichols, our protagonist, because he likes books, right? The guy's well-read. He's talented as a taxidermist. Yes, of course, he drinks a little bit too much. He's into moonshine and he produces it for a lot of the townsfolk. But he's always seemed like elevated, right? And here it almost feels like the roles have been switched, because I'm not believing he's creating an intelligent man's argument to these townspeople. This almost feels like it was spoken by an entirely different character, and that's why I find it so disappointing. Well, one of the reasons why I find it so disappointing. Maybe it'll make sense later, but in the final chapter, the way that develops, I don't think so, right? I think that this is as plain as day, and unfortunately, it seems to have taken the character down a very strange path, like literally out of character. And this continues. A few more people come up to speak, and Mike seemingly brings up these vagrants when he says, He also went off on a tirade about how squatters had been coming into town now and again and how they were likely the ones eating the pigs, and since they had no professions and could not be trusted. And old man Gordeau actually raised his hand before speaking out of turn this time and said, "Forgive me, Pastor, I read the good book cover to cover, and I don't remember no mention of leading pigs into the nettles with flowers around their neck." But Pastor Linden counters with, "The Lord has made manifest his desire for the chase of pigs through tradition. We were not present when the Lord made creation, nor were we of an age to question when our grandfathers saw fit to lead the first pigs away. Will we call them fools that nursed us and nursed our mothers? Will we now walk over their graves to put meat on our plate? We should thank the Lord for letting the choice between him and mammon stand clearly before us." But the final person to speak is Eudora, called by old man Gordeau, and she says something again that I alluded to earlier on, and that is The Wicker Man, the 1970-something film. I can't remember what year. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. It's probably the best film I've seen in the regards of creating a situation that appears to be comical, but then it is quite horrific, honestly. It was extremely low budget, too. Christopher Lee was paid no salary. He denied his salary just so the film could get made, so it was very important to him. But just don't see the Nick Cage remake. And Midsommar is in the same vein of that, but is far, far less effective than the original. But she says, "Why not fashion pigs out of straw or branches and decorate them?" So I have to know by now that Christopher Buehlman is very, very inspired by The Wicker Man. And finally, Martin Cranmer was on his bicycle. He rode around the town square fast like a little boy, and he howled. So here we are, more hints at a wolfish development that is going to befall us soon. And surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, but we find that the aldermen held their vote the next night, deciding 6 against 3 that no more pigs should be herded into the woods. So again, it feels like a decision to just move the plot forward. You can see this is extremely short scene. I would argue that I feel like this would have been better served as something that we saw unfold before our eyes, rather than just a expository sentence that alerts us of what's going to happen. Maybe it has more impact that way, I don't know, but I feel like there was not as much drama that there could have been or should have been in that last scene when the townsfolk were coming up and arguing about it. It would have been great to see a heated argument. It would have been great to see Cranmer come up, break through and just give a sobering speech, right? To see him truly fear for these townsfolk and him himself. But we just didn't get that, right? We had an interesting exchange. Like there's some humor in there, and then Cranmer goes up there and just says it how it is, almost like literally the thoughts in my head as I'm reading this book, and it just felt off. It felt very strange. But anyway, after that, we find out that Paul Miller, he dies. He falls off a shelf, dropping a sack of flour, which burst all over him and the floor. This happened early in the morning, 2 days after. This is future editing Jason stepping in again, because I forgot to mention the fact that this completes what our narrator alluded to earlier on in the chapter when the strange man came into the general store and let us know that Paul Miller would know about the flies. And this was kind of a strange aside. This is in italics here. Why was I hanging around there? Why wasn't I at the typewriter? Because I had to go into those woods next. That's why. Wear your pants, my friend. So we're reminded of that kid yet again. This was kind of a strange structural development, I guess. I mean, I understand that he's, again, being plagued by these thoughts, but Christopher Buehlman has done such a great job building that tension, building those thought beats that are just kind of eating at the back of our protagonist's head. And so this just kind of came out of nowhere for me. It didn't seem that related to what was going on. But Paul Miller was buried in a very large box. His funeral was well attended despite the rains that came on the tail end of a hurricane that had given hell to the Florida Keys. So that's a cool image, right? We have all these people out at this funeral, and it's just a raging storm. People straining to hear the pastor's words in the wind. Like I said, great imagery of a funeral. I really enjoyed this part, and the final line is very fitting. What we all felt that day, even those of us who were new in town, was that something had changed in Whitbrow. Something had given way, and what would follow would not be long. So let me know, did I miss something about this? Does this make sense in the context of something that Paul was involved in? Perhaps I forgot. I know it's been a little while. But that brings us to chapter 15, the final chapter of this read-along. And it's about Eudora. She's teaching these kids. So Eudora started teaching school the Tuesday after Labor Day weekend in a simple building on the outskirts of town that served as the high school. And as many teachers do, Eudora is drawn to a single student named Sarah. She was 15 and fighting a losing battle with her parents to stay in school instead of helping them full-time with the farm. She's a very intelligent girl, and that's obviously why Eudora is drawn to her and committed to trying to see her rise above what she's expected of by her parents and the community. When she's imagining this, one of them would take her by her pretty hair and drag her out into the house to make her peel things and wash things and mend things under his mother's gaze. Eudora told me it would be her chief mission to keep that girl in school, whatever became of the rest rest of them. So she has a mission to help this poor girl. And we're brought back to the pigs because on the second day of school, Dora asked the class to talk about the pigs. She explained that since she was not from Whitbrow, she needed to catch up on its stories. Did anyone know why people first started sending pigs out into the woods? Sarah was the first to raise her hand. This is another interesting development, right? This almost feels like it was written for us, right? The author is saying like, okay, I know the readers are curious about these pigs, and so how could I tell it without being expository, without it feeling forced? Well, I mean, I feel like this is a little bit forced where we have a situation where Eudora is using the children to get the information. And honestly, nothing has really indicated that this bothers her that much. I know she did stand up at the town hall meeting, but there were no asides with the narrator to indicate that she was extremely interested in this, or at least none that I caught, or even our narrator probing her, asking her, hey, talk to those kids, right? You can get to those kids. I really want to know what this is about. That's another thing that's weird about this sequence of chapters is our narrator almost appears to have taken a back seat to the story, right? He's recounting events that other characters have gone through. So I don't know if that's an indication of him being cool with what's happening, but previous chapters have shown him be very affected by his PTSD with the war, with the kid he met in the woods, and it just feels like he's less involved, even though the story is told in first person. But you can see this is actually in third person, pretty much, as if Eudora has told him this, and he's just telling it back to us. But we do get some interesting information from Sarah when she says, my dad used to tell us how once upon a time there was a plantation out there, like when they used to keep slaves. He said that since the man who owned the plantation was so bad, God let the devil come and take the man's soul away without waiting for judgment day. But now the devil knows how to get out of hell by a door he made back then. And when the moon gets full, werewolves, he comes up looking for a new soul to take away. And if you met up with him, it wouldn't matter if you were good or bad. He would just eat up your body and take your soul away with him. The devil likes pigs, though, because they have feet like him. So when he finds a pig, he takes that instead. So at least that ties in to her story, to the pigs, to the devil. But then Saul, he offers up a different story when he says, there's this death dog out there, he said. And other kids nod their heads. It's called a lookaroo. And if you see the dog, use the next to die in town. They say it's black, all black, and as big as 2 dogs. And if you see it, not all the praying in the world's going to keep you from being put in the ground real soon. And this is funny here because this is reminds me of the Nightmare on Elm Street, the 1-2, Freddy's coming for you. But it goes 1-2, 1-2, don't look at me, lookaroo. And all the voices, all the kids' voices come in 3-4, 3-4. Who's a scratching at my door? 5-6, 5-6. Get you while you picking sticks. 7-8, 7-8. Get you if you stay out late. If I say 9-10, I'll never get back home again. And then another boy comes up with a different tale. Way I heard it was a slave gave himself up to the devil back in the slave days so the devil would come up and eat his master. Used a witch doctor and everything. But I guess that's like the other story. And then another kid comes in. I think there are stray dogs out there, or maybe there used to be. Sometimes when dogs go stray, they make a pack like wolves and hunt. And they're very dangerous. Might be someone got killed. Might be. That's why they told stories about a death dog or devil eating somebody. Might be they got scared and started sending pigs out across the river to keep what they thought what was out there from coming to town. So we have a more skeptical kind of story here intermixed with these supernatural ones. And the next very short scene in this chapter is our protagonist meeting Dora after school that day, the storytelling day, and walked her home. He pointed out the diurnal moon, which was more than half full, hiding like a shy spirit behind the branches of a maple tree. But they talk about this briefly. But at the very end is an interesting thing when he catches her talking to the moon through the lace curtain. I couldn't hear her words, as low as they were, but I wasn't half bad at reading lips. I don't need rescuing, she said. I don't really know what that means, honestly. I don't think we've ever gotten a hint whatsoever to her feeling like she needs rescuing or her communicating with anybody in that regard. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And in this next scene, we find that Martin Cranmer gets himself arrested. The day Martin Cranmer got himself arrested, Dora and I were having a soda at Harvey's. I told her that Saul's story about the death dog reminded me of Black Shuck. And Black Shuck is indeed a real thing. In English folklore, Black Shuck, Old Shock, or simply Shuck, is the name given to a ghostly black dog which is said to roam the coastline and countryside of East Anglia. One of many such black dogs recorded in folklore across the British Isles. Accounts of Black Shuck form part of the folklore of Norfolk, Suffolk, the Cambridgeshire fens, and Essex, and descriptions of the creature's appearance and nature vary considerably. It is sometimes recorded omen of death, but in other instances described as companionable. But anyway, check out the Wikipedia description for more. But it is cool that Mr. Buellman is using more actual folklore in his tales. But after that brief aside from our narrator, we see Mr. Cranmer. And what is he doing? Well, Martin placed upon his own head the garland of tea roses he had just crafted. He went from a squat to a sitting position, sitting Indian style with a cigarette in his mouth. What am I doing? Martin said. It's fashioning myself a moon crown since I am high on moonshine. I'm tired of looking at these goddamn flowers and they are tired of being looked at. So I am putting them out of everyone's misery. If you like my headdress, I would be happy to make you one of your own. I am sure there are enough flowers even for your head, which is not small. And when that's not enough, what does he do? He pees everywhere. Because why? He wants to get arrested. Why? Because he wants to get the hell out of town because the chase of the pigs has been canceled. And he knows what's going to happen. So the sheriff decides to take him to Morgan, put him under arrest, and he finishes with, "You get a couple of days in the hole, probably a fine I know you can't pay. This is really a sorry business," and Martin responds with, "You have no idea," Martin said, looking oddly sober for just that moment. "May I keep my garland?" And he says, "Oh, sure, you're going to pay for it, might as well enjoy it. Let's take a ride." But as Cranmer is being taken away, he winks at our protagonist. He is nearly sure he winked at him. And that ends chapters 11 through 15 of Those Across the River. Some disappointments, definitely. But let me know what you think. Did you agree with me? Is there something I missed? But it's a bit unfortunate because I was liking the story so far. I don't think that what has transpired has ruined the story by any stretch, but nonetheless, a little disappointing. Feels like events are happening just to move the plot forward. It feels like characters are somewhat acting out of character, and it seems like some opportunities were missed. But again, still enjoying this book. We'll see how it unfolds next week. So what are we going to read next week? Well, let's continue with this cadence and go 16 through 20. So thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for watching. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Were you disappointed like me? Are there some details that I missed that would make what transpired better? So I'll see you next week with chapters 16 to 20.